Pablo Escobar, a name that strikes fear and fascination in equal measure. As the mastermind behind the Medellin cartel, Escobar rose from humble beginnings to become the wealthiest and most powerful drug lord in history. At the height of his reign, he controlled a vast criminal empire that smuggled tons of cocaine into the United States, earning him billions of dollars and a reputation as the king of cocaine. But Escobar's story is more than just a tale of drug-fueled riches and violence. It's a complex saga of ambition, corruption, and the devastating impact of the cocaine trade on the people of Colombia and beyond. From his early days as a small-time smuggler to his dramatic fall from power, Escobar's life is a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked greed and the human cost of the war on drugs. In this episode, we'll take a deep dive into the rise and fall of Pablo Escobar, exploring the key events and personalities that shaped his criminal career. We'll examine the inner workings of the Medellin cartel, the innovative smuggling techniques that made Escobar a billionaire, and the reign of terror he unleashed on his enemies and his own people. So buckle up and get ready for a journey into the heart of the Colombian cocaine trade. This is the story of Pablo Escobar, the most notorious drug lord in history. Warning: the following video is meant for educational purposes only and should not be taken otherwise. Apex Crime Lords does not condone, encourage, or glorify the actions of the individuals covered in this program. Viewer discretion is advised. Keep watching until the end to see what's next on Apex Crime Lords. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1st, 1949 in the small town of Rio Negro, Colombia. The son of a farmer and schoolteacher, young Pablo grew up in a modest household, but always dreamed of something more. As a teenager, he turned to a life of crime, starting out as a petty thief and car thief before graduating to smuggling contraband cigarettes and marijuana. In the 1970s, Escobar discovered the lucrative potential of a new product: cocaine. He began building a smuggling operation, working with a small group of trusted associates to transport small amounts of the drug from Colombia to the United States. At the time, cocaine was still a relatively unknown substance, used mainly by the rich and famous in Hollywood and on Wall Street. But Escobar saw an opportunity to expand the market and make cocaine available to a wider audience. He used his criminal connections and his natural charisma to build relationships with cocoa farmers in Peru and Bolivia, securing a steady supply of the raw material needed to produce cocaine. He also recruited a network of smugglers and distributors in the United States, laying the groundwork for what would become a massive criminal empire. As his operation grew, Escobar began to amass a fortune. He used his wealth to buy influence and protection, bribing police officers, judges, and politicians to look the other way. He also invested in legitimate businesses, including real estate, construction, and even a chain of pharmacies, as a way to launder his drug money and build a veneer of respectability. But even as he rose to become one of the richest and most powerful men in Colombia, Escobar never forgot his roots. He cultivated an image as a Robin Hood figure who used his wealth to build schools, hospitals, and housing projects for the poor. He even ran for political office, winning a seat as an alternate member of Colombia's Congress in 1982. However, behind the facade of the generous benefactor lurked a ruthless criminal mastermind. Escobar was willing to use violence and intimidation to protect his empire, and he had no qualms about ordering the assassinations of his rivals or anyone who stood in his way. As the cocaine trade exploded in the 1980s, Escobar's power and influence would reach new heights and plunge Colombia into a bloody war that would claim thousands of lives. In the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar's cocaine empire was reaching new heights. With a network of smugglers, distributors, and corrupt officials at his disposal, Escobar was able to flood the United States with massive quantities of the drug, fueling a booming market and raking in billions of dollars in profits. Central to Escobar's success was his innovative approach to smuggling. He used a variety of methods to transport cocaine from Colombia to the United States, including small planes, boats, and even submarines. He also pioneered the use of drug mules, recruiting people to swallow condoms filled with cocaine and smuggle them into their stomachs. But Escobar's rise to power was not without its challenges. As his wealth and influence grew, so did the attention of law enforcement agencies in the US and Colombia. Escobar responded by unleashing a campaign of violence and terror, ordering the assassinations of police officers, judges, and journalists who dared stand in his way. One of the most notorious examples of Escobar's brutality came in 1985, when members of the rival Cali cartel attempted to assassinate him in Bogota. Escobar escaped unharmed, but he retaliated by ordering a bombing campaign that left dozens of civilians dead and hundreds more injured. Despite the violence, Escobar continued to expand his empire and cement his grip on power. He built a sprawling estate called Hacienda Nápoles, complete with a private zoo, a bull ring, and even a replica of the Statue of Liberty. He also ran for political office, using his wealth and influence to buy votes and intimidate his opponents. At the height of his power in the late 1980s, Escobar was estimated to be worth over $30 billion, making him one of the richest men in the world. He controlled a vast criminal enterprise that stretched from the jungles of Colombia to the streets of Miami, and he seemed untouchable. But even as he reveled in his success, trouble was brewing on the horizon. The US government was ramping up its effort to combat the cocaine trade, and the Colombian authorities were growing increasingly frustrated with Escobar's brazen defiance of the law. In 1989, Escobar's luck finally ran out when he was indicted by a US federal grand jury on charges of drug trafficking and money laundering. Facing the prospect of extradition to the US and a lengthy prison sentence, Escobar went into hiding, sparking a massive manhunt that would last for over a year. But even as he evaded capture, Escobar's grip on power was slipping, and his once loyal associates were starting to turn against him. As Pablo Escobar went into hiding in the wake of his U.S. indictment, he faced a new set of challenges in his quest to hold on to power. With the Colombian government and the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA, were closing in on him, Escobar was forced to rely on his wits and his network of loyal associates to stay one step ahead of the law. One of Escobar's key strategies during this time was to use his vast wealth to buy protection and influence. He bribed police officers and politicians to look the other way, and he used his connections in the Colombian military to secure safe havens and escape routes. But even as he worked to evade capture, Escobar continued to run his criminal empire from the shadows. He maintained contact with his network of smugglers and distributors, using coded messages and trusted intermediaries to keep the cocaine flowing. However, Escobar's grip on power was starting to slip. Many of his former allies, including some of his own family members, began to turn against him, either out of fear or prosecution, or in hopes of securing a better deal for themselves. In an attempt to negotiate a surrender on his own terms, Escobar proposed a deal to the Colombian government in which he would plead guilty to a single charge of drug trafficking and serve a short sentence in a prison of his own design. The government initially agreed to the deal, and Escobar surrendered himself in June of 1991. But the prison, known as La Catedral, was hardly a punishment. Escobar had designed it himself, and it featured luxuries like a soccer field, a bar, and even a waterfall. Escobar continued to run his criminal empire from the prison, using his guards as his own personal army. The Colombian government soon realized that it had been duped, and in July of 1992, it attempted to move Escobar to a more secure facility. But Escobar got wind of the plan and escaped, disappearing into the mountains with a small group of loyal bodyguards. The escape marked the beginning of the end for Escobar. The Colombian government, with help of the US DEA, launched a massive manhunt to track him down. Escobar's former associates, many of whom had turned against him, provided valuable intelligence that helped the authorities close in on his location. In December of 1993, after months of close calls and near misses, Escobar was finally cornered in a Medellin safe house. In a dramatic shootout with Colombian security forces, Escobar was struck down, beginning an end to his reign as the king of cocaine. But even in death, Escobar's legacy would live on. The cocaine trade he helped to build would continue to flourish, fueling violence and corruption in Colombia and beyond. And the myth of Pablo Escobar, the ruthless mastermind who defied the law and built an empire on the backs of the poor, would endure as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition and greed. The final months of Pablo Escobar's life were a desperate game of cat and mouse, as he sought to evade capture by the Colombian authorities and the US DEA. With his network of allies and safe houses dwindling, Escobar was forced to rely on a small group of loyal bodyguards and family members to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. But even as he scrambled to stay alive, Escobar's once mighty criminal empire was crumbling around him. Many of his former associates had turned against him, either to save their own skins or to curry favor with the authorities. The Cali cartel, Escobar's main rival in the cocaine trade, was taking advantage of his weakened position to expand its own operations and seize control of key smuggling routes. Escobar's fall from power was also taking a toll on his personal life. His wife and children had been forced into hiding, living in constant fear of assassination or capture. Escobar himself was plagued by paranoia and desperation, convinced that everyone around him was a potential traitor. In the end, it was a combination of old-fashioned police work and modern technology that brought Escobar down. The Colombian police, working with the DEA and other U.S. agencies, used a variety of tactics to track his movements, including wiretaps, surveillance, and even a special unit of trained snipers. On December 2nd of 1993, the authorities finally caught up with Escobar in a Medellin safe house. In a dramatic shootout, Escobar was struck down while attempting to flee across the rooftops. The man who had once been the most powerful and feared drug lord in the world died in a violent and justifiable death, with his body splayed out on a Medellin rooftop. The news of Escobar's death was greeted with jubilation in Colombia and around the world. For many, his demise marked the end of an era of narco-terrorism and the beginning of a new chapter in Colombia's history. But others warned that the victory was only temporary, and that the cocaine trade Escobar had helped to build would continue to flourish in his absence. In the years that followed, the Medellin cartel would fragment and collapse as rival factions fought for control of the lucrative cocaine trade. The Cali cartel would emerge as the dominant player in the Colombian underworld, only to be brought down itself a few years later by a massive US-led investigation. But even as the drug trade evolved and changed, the legacy of Pablo Escobar would endure. For many Colombians, he remains a complex and controversial figure, admired by some for his rags-to-riches story and his generosity toward the poor, reviled by others for the violence and corruption he unleashed on his country. In death, as in his life, Pablo Escobar continues to cast a long shadow over the history of Colombia and the global drug trade. His story is a cautionary tale about the perils of greed, ambition, and the unintended consequences of the war on drugs, a war that continues to rage on decades after his demise. The rise and fall of Pablo Escobar is a story that continues to fascinate and horrify us in equal measure. Here was a man who rose from humble beginnings to become one of the wealthiest and most powerful criminals in history, only to be brought down by his own arrogance and the relentless pursuit of justice. On one level, Escobar's story is a testament to the corrupting influence of power and the seductive lure of easy money. He was a man who started out with nothing and built an empire on the backs of the poor and the vulnerable, exploiting the weaknesses of a system that was rife with corruption and inequality. But Escobar's story is also a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of the war on drugs. The very policies that were meant to curb the cocaine trade ended up fueling its growth, and the profits from the illegal market soared and the violence and corruption spread like a cancer. In the end, it was the human cost of Escobar's empire that was the most staggering. The thousands of lives lost to violence and addiction, the families torn apart, and the communities ravaged by fear and despair. These are the true legacies of the cocaine trade that Escobar helped to build. And yet, even in death, Escobar continues to loom large in the popular imagination. His story has been the subject of countless books, movies, and TV shows, each one seeking to unravel the myths and realities of his life and times. Perhaps it's because Escobar's story speaks to something deep within us, the desire for power, the lure of the forbidden, and the allure of the outlaw. Or perhaps it's because his rise and fall is a reminder of the fragility and even the most seemingly invincible empires, and the inevitability of justice in the face of great evil. Whatever the reason, The story of Pablo Escobar is one that will be continued to be told and retold for generations to come. It's a story of ambition and greed, of violence and corruption, of the human capacity for both great good and great evil. As we reflect on the life and times of the king of cocaine, let us remember the lessons of his story. Let us work to build a world where the lure of easy money and the corrupting influence of power are held in check by the rule of law and the values of justice and compassion. And let us never forget the human cost of the drug trade. The lives lost, the families destroyed, and the communities ravaged by violence and despair. For it's only by confronting the true costs of our actions that we can hope to build a better future for ourselves and for our generations to come. Up next, from the mean streets of New York to the glittering lights of Las Vegas, one man's vision would turn a desert oasis into a gambling mecca. But behind the glamour and glitz, a dark undercurrent of violence and a betrayal lurked. Join us next time as we unravel the complex web of power, ambition, and deadly alliances that define the life and times of Bugsy Siegel, the charismatic and ruthless mobster who built an empire in the sands, only to be undone by his own pride. Discover the untold story of the man behind the myth and the bloody legend he left behind. Join us for Bugsy Siegel, the gambler who bet on Vegas and lost. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of the cocaine trade and the lives of one of the most notorious figures. Maybe the story of Pablo Escobar serves as a reminder of the perils of unchecked power and the importance of justice, now and always. If you found it illuminating, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Apex Crime Lords for more unvarnished portraits of the mobsters, killers, and kingpins who have left their bloody mark on history. Until next time, stay safe and stay dangerous.